Everything rises and falls on leadership. The ability to lead well is fueled by living your cause and purpose. This podcast will equip you with the tools to do just that. Live and lead with cause and purpose. And now, author of the book, The Anatomy of Leadership, and our host, Chris Comeaux.
Hello and welcome. I'm so excited today to introduce to our audience a good friend. David Sachsenmaier is here with us. He's a corporate executive coach. Welcome, David. Good to have you.
Thank you, Chris. Great to be here.
Yeah, let me introduce you to the audience. So David is a trained, certified professional, certified coach with ICF, the International Coach Federation, with over 15 years coaching corporate and nonprofit executives and over 4,000 coaching hours. He's in the process of becoming a master certified coach, the highest professional coaching designation in the world. David has 30 years of international experience working with U.S., European business executives and managers in both corporate banking and also the nonprofit world. David is a managing director in the European corporate group at Bank of America in Charlotte, North Carolina, in the corporate and investment banking group. David managed the bank's highest and most strategic European corporate and investment banking relationships. David, interestingly, has a master's in divinity with a concentration in counseling. His graduate degree in continuing coaching, training people provide critical foundations that enable David to see deeply into the lives of business executives. He also has an undergraduate degree in international business, and this part I did not know, and French from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So again, David, it's so good to have you. And I was trying to think about as we're preparing for this, where we first met. It was so Dave's got a very large family. I have a very, very large family. All of our kids were homeschooled, and it feels like we're at some group and we just struck up a conversation with each other.
Yeah, we had recently moved back from living in England. We lived in England for a few years where I was working and came back to the United States. And we had a stopover in the North Carolina mountains for about 6 months before we moved out to Colorado, where I now live, Colorado Springs, and been here for about 17 years. And I think it was in that time in North Carolina in the mountains through some mutual friends that we got connected, actually.
Yeah. And it seems like I remember us being early on, like sitting in a pool together, and you and I were just like talking just about mutual, just remember sitting there just kind of talking with you. And that was one of the first times I just really, and just to know that beginning to know that the treasure you are. And so again, I'm super excited just to introduce you to our audience. So this is a good question. I prepared you for this one. It's a good way to introduce you. What's your superpower?
Oh, that's always a great question. It's a humbling question to put it into words. But honestly, what I do, Chris, with corporate executives and leadership teams today and my own arc and journey of that, people do ask me that sometimes. And I would honestly say that part of my superpower is once I start working with someone individually, a corporate executive in a one-on-one coaching relationship, as well as corporate teams, very quickly, I make people feel seen. I make them feel heard. I tell them, part of the beauty of an executive coaching relationship, I say to them, I'm not your boss. I'm not one of your direct reports. I'm not your spouse. I'm also not your best friend that you're going to sit at Starbucks with, who's going to say to you, oh, Bill, you don't worry about that, what they're telling you at work. You're awesome, dude. You don't have anything to work on. But I stand completely outside of somebody's life with total objectivity. And I create this place of complete confidentiality. And I tell people that in our journey together, I'm the place and the person where they can show up and they can say absolutely anything to me. And so when people start to really feel seen and heard and understood, then we can do some incredible work together and get down to the roots of what's holding them back in their leadership journey, where they're stuck, where they tend to get triggered. I'll talk more about that today. And then they can have what I call leadership awakenings, powerful, transformative interior awakenings that takes them to a whole new level in their leadership.
Wow. Well, we have shared with you some people that I care about quite a bit, and you have just done phenomenal work with them. And so one of the things I was thinking about, I've never actually had the privilege of having you as my executive coach, but there's some things that you've done with me and as we were preparing, I just thought about one of the first times I got to really see you in action besides us just hanging out with our families. You did a retreat. I think you called it a vocational retreat. And you started that morning and you were talking and you kept shaking. You had this mason jar and apparently had water and dirt in it. And you were shaking it the whole time you were kind of doing your introduction. And then you put it down. Can you describe that to our audience? Like, what was the point of that? Because I think of that so often, actually.
Well, thank you, Chris. Yeah, it's such a simple visual and metaphor. And so at the beginning of that morning, as you were explaining, I have this jar that I brought in and it's got just some basic dirt in it. And I shake it all up and then I set it down in front of the room. And everybody sees it. And when I set it down, as you can imagine, the water in that jar is very, very cloudy. And the interesting thing about this is it stays cloudy during the day for hours. Even though I've set it down, it's no longer being, shaken, but it takes hours for the water to settle. And later in the day, what I came back to on when I do that kind of a retreat and one day with teams, later in the day, I'll draw the attention back to that jar that's sitting beside me where I'm speaking. And I'll say, what do you notice here later in the day about this jar? And everybody comments and says, wow, the water is so clear now. And what I use that as a metaphor, Chris, as an example of, corporate leaders, we're constantly living in that chaotic, shaken state as if what's happening in our companies and our team and our leadership and our industries, constantly having to pivot and adapt and change and forks in the road. We're constantly stirred up, both exteriorly and interiorly. And the greatest, most powerful leadership, every leader, heart, mind, body, and soul, needs some time to settle, needs some time to be still, to become quiet, and to really listen and pay attention to what's happening inside of me as a leader and what's happening with my people. And it takes time. And I love that metaphor that happens over a couple hours as that jar sits in front of people.
I didn't tell you I was going to ask you this, but do you remember how long ago that was? Could it have been 16 years ago, 15 years ago? Could it have been that long?
I think it was probably around 2012, 2013.
I think you just moved to Colorado. So I think you had because you came back for that retreat, but I don't think you'd been there probably less than a year. The reason why I say that, I literally pulled and it's so powerful to me because having that visual metaphor, and there are some ahas I had during that day that I literally just pulled from at a conference that I was out your way in Buena Vista a couple of weeks ago. And so again, it just, you have an amazing gift and even a gift that even pays forward that many years into the future. So
thank you, Chris.
Well, that's probably a good segue. So you often talk about how a leader's inner world shapes their leadership behavior. What are the most common ways that you see, we'll call it hidden pain, that might show up in executive leaders, especially in high-performing organizations or really just any organization?
Sure. Well, you know what? That illustration with the mason jar and the dirty water that's, shaken up and takes hours to settle, that's a great word picture, actually. When I'm working with leaders and I'm very aware that there's a lot of maybe internal disruption and noise and chaos. Sometimes I'm aware, I don't know where it comes from, but an interior pain or exterior pain. When I see that, the leadership behaviors that I notice with someone when we begin our journey together, they are actually living and leading in a kind of constantly chaotic sort of state. They themselves are very reactive, like ping pong, juggling so many balls, which of course executive leaders always are having to do, juggling so many balls in the air. But when I notice that someone is not settled in their interior leadership place and anchored and really, really grounded, then they're just constantly reacting. And they're pivoting and they make impulsive decisions and they turn and pivot quickly with their team and their leadership. And then other people walk away, their direct reports walk away and say unconsciously, they don't have words for it, but like, Bill or Elizabeth, man, I am so confused. I don't understand. And they create this sense of further rippling effect of kind of chaos, vagueness, uncertainty in the leadership culture.
Kind of feels like the spirit of the age when you keep describing it. It's like, this, like all the tools are meant to kind of create this terminal distraction. You've got Teams open, you got email open, multiple major changes in which way is this industry supposed to be going? How am I supposed to shape it? And what is the government going to do? And how is that going to shape it? And it's interesting. The other thing I thought of when I was listening to recently, a CEO told me, she said, I feel like, karate chop this and karate chop that. Hi-ya, I got that. And at one hand, I'm like, I totally get what she's saying. But on the other hand, I'm like, I'm not sure that is actually leadership, because you're literally just kind of reacting to one thing to another.
Right. And leading a bloodbath behind you.
Yeah, exactly.
A bloodbath of people behind you. Right.
Yeah. So many leaders are rewarded for traits that are kind of maybe implicit in what we're just talking about, things like control, perfectionism, hyperachievement, even being emotionally detached. At what point do these maybe so-called strengths become liabilities? And what does maybe some of this even have to do with their own, I'll say, self-awareness or lack of self-awareness?
Yeah, great question, Chris. I'm at the very end of baby boomers. I'll be 65 next year, which I find hard to believe. And a grandfather.
I have that. I thought you and I were Xers. I had no idea you were a baby boomer.
Oh, yes. And I'll be a first-time grandfather later this year.
That's awesome.
So, but you know what? I realized, honestly, as a baby boomer and having spent a long corporate chapter at Bank of America in the corporate investment bank, in what I call the deep, dark corporate trenches of corporate America at a huge place like Bank of America, there are so many corporate illusions. There are so many leadership illusions that I think are huge, especially in what I call baby boomer leadership culture, which is drive harder, drive faster, make it bigger. We're just here to make more money. But there is an unconscious, unintended leadership illusion underneath that. And that leadership illusion is that, well, people are really just machines. Mm-hmm. We, the executive team, I'm the CEO, I am here to run a fine-tuned machine. Well, what people don't realize in that leadership paradigm is you start treating all of your people in an organization as if they are machines. And they are not. And it's interesting with millennials rising more and more to leadership across the Western world, corporate leadership. They have very, very different values. But when leaders start unconsciously and unintendedly treating people like machines, well, then there is huge amount of engagement, of productivity, of innovation and creativity that is leaking out the bottom of the organization, which results in billions of dollars of loss of income and profitability for industries across the United States. Because when people start to sense that they're being treated like machines, they move from their prefrontal cortex. They move only about whatever this is, 6-7 inches to their limbic system. And then so many employees in a company are living in their limbic system because the leaders are living and leading from their limbic system, which is fight, flight, or freeze. And when people are working in a corporate culture where even the executive team is modeling and living and leading from their limbic system, then they're going to be in their limbic system. And there is no creativity, innovation that can happen. And so companies just stay in this perpetual loop.
Wow. I actually heard a statistic the other day from one of our team members that Gallup said, Gallup's one of the largest survey companies in the entire world, that only 20% of the workforce is engaged. 20%. Now, I'm blessed. TCM was voted one of the best places to work in America. So 6 of the hospices we work with, and you've got to be closer to 90%. But that just broke my heart. I mean, that's like the vast majority of places, and you've got kids now going into the workplace, so do I. And you start to realize that the road less traveled is a good organization that tends to this. And the other thing that occurs to me listening to you, David, is And it was Henry Ford that said, why do I get their brains when all I want is their two hands? Therein lies the very roots of management that is spilled over
Exactly.
into today. And then now you've
Right.
got the advent of artificial intelligence. So it does feel like we've got like this kind of two roads emerged in the woods, and which shall we take? And so
Right.
I don't know if that kind of prompts additional kind of comments from you, but it feels like we're at an interesting crossroads. There's no better word.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Chris. I think there is in some ways, my wife would say, oh, David, don't sound dramatic. But in some ways, there's like a fork in the road, I think, in corporate American culture in our time in history. We could choose, or individual companies and leaders could choose what I might even say is a darker path. And under this illusion that, no, they really are machines. And if you just sort of drive them harder and faster, you'll get more productivity and more engagement. That is a complete denial that we are all human beings. I often say to my clients that at the end of the day, we are all human beings having a shared corporate experience. What so many leaders don't realize, and this is what I love to bring as an example of a leadership awakening with executive teams, is the buried gold. The buried gold with employees, the buried gold with teams, the buried gold in a culture is helping people find their own interior place where they really feel rooted and grounded and they feel safe and they want to show up at work to give, and they're not showing up at work every day stuck in just survival mode.
That's so good. And I was just thinking that we did a podcast last year with Daniel Pink, and he wrote a book that actually was written. I had no idea until we were doing the podcast. I didn't check the copyright date, but it was written during the Bush administration. But the title of the book is A Whole New Mind. And he was predicting in the age of AI that the superpowers of the future are definitely not the limbic system things. It's storytelling. It's being creative, design, symphony, which is much more what you're poking on. So it's almost like there is two roads in front of us, and the road that's going to create the greatest good for us, as well as whatever our organization does, is maybe what has been the road less traveled, which is a good segue. So you coach leaders, not just to perform better, but to become more whole. How do you define wholeness in the context of leadership?
Yeah, it's a great question. Chris, one of the things I do more and more these days with a lot of companies, certainly a number of hospices around the United States and a lot of other industries that I work with. There's a client I'm working with right now, $5 billion revenue company, and I'm working with 60 people, 60 of their high potential leaders. And I put them in a 1-year leadership cohort, which is like me designing and creating a leadership MBA program inside their company that they all go through. And coaching is a huge part of that. And the whole first module, when I'm taking managers and executives and leaders through a leadership development journey, I think of it as like an arc and a journey that we're going to go on together. The whole first module of that, Chris, is interior leadership. And we spend some months slowing down the whole process. I'll tell them it's not just a 5-day corporate executive leadership training class that starts on a Monday morning at a Marriott hotel conference room, and finishes on Friday at 5:00. And then that corporate notebook sits up on a bookshelf forever. Their context, where they are at their company, their team, their industry, that is the homework, and that's the landscape that we're working on. So this interior place of wholeness is helping them realize, quite simply, Chris, their worth and value, even what I call some people like, David, what are you talking about? What I call leadership belovedness. Their worth and value as a human being is interior. It's not exterior. It's not about their role. It's not about their title. It's not about their bank account or the health of their marriage or their kids or how many houses they have scattered around the United States or, a villa in France. It is this deep interior place where all of us as human beings, I believe, have a sacred identity and worth and value that nobody at work, I say to my clients more and more these days, no place, no people, and no situation at your company can tell you who you are or who you are not. So this whole first place leading to wholeness, and some use the term leadership resilience, but it's their interior anchored place. Their worth and value is not exteriorly derived, is what I speak about, this sense of leadership belovedness. I have worth and value before I get to work, while I'm at work, and when I leave work. And no situation at work or person can add to that sense of worth and value or take away from it.
There's so many thoughts going through my mind, but first off, we have a 1-year leadership certification course called Teleash University.
Right.
And, you and I didn't compare notes, but the arc is very similar. In fact, the whole first semester is all about self-discovery.
Right.
And then ultimately you move them towards people making and then organizational making. But that's typically what you think you get in leadership, right? Building the team, whatever the organization does. But it starts much more foundationally. And the other interesting thing you made me think about, David, coolest thing my wife gave me many years ago. Now she used it in homeschool with our kids, but it was a first edition Daniel Webster dictionary. So literally went back to the beginning of our country.
Right.
And my favorite word in the world is integrity. Do you know the original derivation of the word integrity was really about wholeness? It was about a person that was, and you think about that word integrity, but in the context of someone who's truly whole, which it may be a lifelong process of becoming that. It's not a destination. It's much more about a journey. Does that resonate with you?
Absolutely. And Chris, let me add one other comment to this place about wholeness and interior wholeness. What I often help leaders realize, and this will sound totally ironic and upside down. Even as you asked me about wholeness, one can imagine, okay, I need to get better at this and better at this and better at this, right? I need to put all my Lego pieces together in a better way so I present this beautiful exterior picture. What I often help people realize, and this is part of an example of the buried gold, in that whole first module about deepening our sense of true identity and worth and value that has nothing to do with work or the company or my success or performance or the performance of my company and my industry, I help them realize every person comes to work every single day with a limp. This is nothing new under the sun, but every person walks with a limp. We don't always talk about it at work because that's not what work is for, but everybody brings their story to work. And I have worked with corporate executives, Chris, that when we got to this part of the journey, and they looked at me and said, David, at first, I have no idea what you're talking about. Right. But it was that dropping into that deeper place of their own self-awareness of their pain, their broken, imperfect places, as Brene Brown likes to talk about a lot. And I always say that until you are really attuned to how you limp in your leadership, you're never going to have radar to be able to see your people very deeply below the waterline. And if you can't see your people deeply and you can't naturally attune to when they start limping at work and they need something different from you, they're never going to really feel safe and they're never going to really want to follow you.
That's so good. Well, that's a good segue. So what changes do you typically see in a leader once they become more conscious of their inner world and maybe we'll call them their unresolved issues?
Yes. Chris, I think when people drop to a deeper place of self-awareness, maybe ironically becoming more whole, aware of how they limp and their people limp, and here's a great distinction. So many corporate leaders show up at work every day to get. Unconsciously, they are looking for approval. They're looking for acceptance. They're looking for success. They're looking for engagement. They're looking for all these external things. And in and of themselves, there's nothing wrong with that. At the executive level, we do have to run companies, nonprofits, and for-profits that do need to be what the world would call successful. The difference is, once people have had their interior awakening, that their worth and value doesn't come from exterior places, then they no longer show up at work in their leadership to get from people, actually stealing and taking from people. They show up to give and to walk away. And it's as if every day they walk through the villages and the streets of a simple village holding out bread and water. Do you need bread? Do you need water? I have bread and water to give you. Oh, you don't like my bread? Okay, that's fine. Somebody else, you might have better bread for you. And then when people get that place, they're also moving from their limbic system back up here. Their leadership behaviors, they're less chaotic. They're more grounded. They're more centered. They are way less reactive. And they view experiences rather than our problem we've got to fix and solve. But, oh, wow, this is a fascinating situation. We don't know what to do. They start using we language way more than I. And they're less dictatorial. And they become way more open and curious with how can we as a team grapple with this challenge that's before us. So there's a shifting that happens from everything is about me, very ego-driven leadership, to their orientation is very much about how can I help my people thrive.
And does it become, what's the word I'm looking for, in that kind of environment where if everyone's on that type of journey, where then we even start rubbing off on each other in that way because we're living in a more vulnerable state, and that vulnerability, self-reflection, it's almost like the peer pressure is towards that living better, being better. You probably will say it a much better way.
Well, no, but Chris, it's very well said. And the way I hear your question, that comment is, I think it's contagious.
Yes.
And it begins at the top, of course. That is the essence of leadership. At the top of the mountain, if the corporate executive team is living in a constant state of chaos and agitated like the mason jar, and there's constantly dirty water, and all the employees are drinking dirty water all day out of the water fountains, well, then there's no productivity engagement. But when leaders are grounded and centered and they're more here, there's a sense of calmness, right? And then, yes, that's contagious also, because people pick up on that vibe, which is all high functioning neurology of the brain and corporate culture.
You're making me reflect. This is my next question, but you're making me reflect upon my early hospice experience. So let me ask you the question, and I'll tell you about my early experience. So healthcare and hospice, many leaders spend their lives caring for other people, but neglecting themselves. It's almost paradoxical. Why do helping professions often attract people that are carrying unresolved pain and trauma? And this is my early reflection. I was thinking the very first CEO I worked for was not emotionally intelligent. It was very much from that probably the first generation baby boomers. Pick yourself up by the bootstraps. We don't talk about that foo-foo stuff. And when I remember being in a meeting and we were doing our health insurance renewal, and we were looking at the use of psychotropic drugs, and just like rolled his eyes and goes, all these healthcare people are on psychotropic drugs. They're all wacky and crazy. That literally was kind of what he said. And I just remember thinking, there probably is a lot more that we need to understand of what this is about. And it was just very cynical, what you're saying earlier, kind of looking at people as they're a robot.
Chris, I would say, first of all, working with a lot of different industries across the country, unfortunately, it's not just hospice and healthcare professionals and healthcare organizations where you see a lot of this. You do see it in a lot of different corporate industries across America. However, working also with a lot of healthcare leaders and executives, what comes to mind, your question, why does it seem that so many of them that are in the caring professions and caring industries, they tend to not be taking care of themselves, right? So they're giving great output, and yet ironically, in inversely connection relationship, not taking care of themselves. Well, what I've realized, Chris, and a lot of people realize this, nothing new under the sun, but being in an industry like that, for the healthcare leaders and managers, it is a great place to hide, to avoid, and to deny taking care of their own limps and pain and needs. Because how in the world, if you're a hospice organization and you are helping people have their best possible, the patient and their family of a loved one who is walking through their final days, weeks, months, whatever it may be. Well, how in the world should I, why should I take off a week of vacation, when there's so many things happening at the organization? So it is a huge, huge challenge. And again, there's an illusion that even how so many people manage themselves as managers and leaders, even in a place like hospice, that, I don't really have needs. One of the things I coach a lot of my clients on, and sometimes I'll say when we're having this conversation, all right, I want you to write a sticky note. I want it to stick on your, screen of your computer or beside your desk every day. And I have them write this down as like a brand new mantra. And one simple mantra, I say, it is okay for me to ask for what I want and what I need. And so many people just neglect that. And what I remind them of, if you continue on this path, you will eventually burn out. And this is not sustainable leadership.
That's so good, David. You're making me reflect. This is why I love being around you. And so I had John Burke on my podcast, the guy who wrote the book Imagine Heaven. And I had the sense I was supposed to hold the podcast. I held it till Hurricane Helene hit, became viral. It's still to this day the most downloaded podcast of all of our history. And I remember reflecting, because obviously his whole premise in his book is this life is not all that we get. So if that is true, then what's the point of this life? And so the conclusion is love God, love people. Well, I missed the third part of that till I went on my first sabbatical that next year and had a lot of good time to contemplate. And that third part I missed was, and it's also to love yourself. That's the point of this life. Love others, love God, and love yourself. And all three, interestingly, work very well with each other. And I feel you saying it and just using it slightly different words. Does that feel right to you?
Oh, absolutely. And Chris, that comment makes me think, I think I've told you this. I'm working with my own writing coach right now, working on my first book. My coach is in England. And we meet regularly and go over what I'm writing about leadership stuff, very much like you and your podcast. We have so much in common of what we're passionate about. But a lot of your readers may know where this comes from. But we often speak of Lord of the Rings and Gandalf and Aragorn and some of those primary characters, of course. And many people are very familiar with one of the most greatest quotes that Tolkien made in that writing of the Lord of the Rings is a moment when I think that Gandalf is talking to maybe Samwise or whatever, and he says this big universal statement, all that really, this is a rough paraphrase, but all that really matters is what we do at the time that we have been given. A lot of people know of that comment. But you know what, Chris, as I'm working on my own book, even in the last months, and I said to my coach, well, this feels very Gandalf-y, right? So Gandalf didn't say this. Tolkien didn't write this, but in the world of leadership, what I really think and believe this is how I show up with so many corporate executives. This brand new sort of mantra, all that really matters in life is what we do with the pain that we have been given. And the most highly effective leaders do their interior work so they are not bringing their pain to their company, to their teams, to their direct reports, to the culture, because interior pain, and everybody walks with a limp. I'm not talking about massive dramatic things here. Everybody walks with a limp, and every human being brings pain to their leadership. And if that pain, if they're not seeking help from someone outside their life for that pain to be transformed, then that pain is being transmitted at their company. And they're creating corporate cultures that are toxic and where people don't feel safe. And nobody realizes what's happening below the waterline. But I just love that idea. Is there any greater question and challenge to true leadership? And Chris, you and I know it applies at work and at home.
And at home, because we take it home with us as well.
Exactly.
Don't miss part 2 of this episode coming this Friday.